The story of fearing the evil of the one you did well for. A wife with a high degree of beauty, characterized by her excess tenderness on everyone around her, but also at the same time an introvert, and all that matters to her about her life is her mother, and the only remaining of all her parents, and her husband with her eye. Her life was extremely normal, enjoying enough calm, tranquility, and reassurance until the day came when the door was knocked on her neighbor living in front of them. And this neighbor was about a lot of rumors from the residents of Amara, and this wife was repelling them from their talk about her and reminding them of God and his messenger. On this day, her husband died, so the wife pitied her and called her husband to come from his work and help the neighbor in burial, consolation, and all these things. This situation was the first thing that brought them all together. The neighbor felt emptiness after the death of her husband, so the wife pitied her and introduced her in an unprecedented way to her like her life. The neighbor was always with them at their house and outside as well, so that the wife was taking her to visit her mother, who was treating her as hers, and trying to beggars and compensated for her loss of her husband, the only support for her all life. After several months, the mother fell seriously ill. The wife left her husband and stayed at her mother, taking care of her and taking care of her. She had suggested to her husband go with her and stay there at her parents' house, but he objected to that. A few days passed and her mother left life. What surprised the wife was that her husband was like the stranger after the death of her mother, and the days of her illness did not come to visit her once. And when she returned to her house, she found him upset and criticized her in everything she does, so much so that I found her wearing new and very pajamas as if she were a bride. She marveled at her situation, and I was even more surprised when I spoke to her unbearably and unbelievably. And finally, as she was about to kick her out of her house, she fell to the ground, hidden. The wife was shocked and called the doctor, and most of the residents of the building gathered to check on their neighbor and help the wife. And when the doctor told them that there was no need to worry and that everything that happened to her was because of pregnancy, all the residents left after they denounced her action and told the wife that they were right when they were talking about her, especially after her husband died. They would notice strange people about the building going up to her late at night. The wife exploded in them and told them that she was probably married in secret and therefore she is pregnant, and I urged them to think well of her. And her reward was from her neighbor when she woke up, but she expelled her from her house. She returned to her house sadly pouring tears, and when her husband returned, she informed him of what had happened from her neighbor, which she considered her friend. And his reaction was violent, as he told her that they should move to live in her mother's house immediately, and that such a neighbor and her bad reputation would affect everyone in architecture. And he does not satisfy him to touch his wife badly, even in one word. Indeed, the wife moved to her mother's house in implementation of her husband's desire, and after several months she was shopping and was surprised by one of her former neighbors who had a serious matter for her. The wife discovered from her that her husband had married her neighbor and that she was pregnant with him, and how with all her heart she satisfied her satisfaction with such a situation. The wife went to her old house to check the information, and already as soon as she knocked the bell, her husband opened the door for her. After that, her neighbor came out with her stomach, and her stomach grew up. The wife did not say a single word from the impact of the shock. But when her husband was interested in holding her to know what happened to her and try to soften his severity on her, she screamed in his face, saying, "Hand, get away from me and do not dare again to touch me. And I only want one thing from you and my divorce paper." She drew a smile on her neighbor's face, and the wife came to her in several steps. "My lord, and he will come to me from you." Indeed, the wife insisted on a divorce and got it. And when her neighbor completed her pregnancy for months and it was time to give birth, the penalty was as the uterus of the neighbor exploded and the doctors had to remove it. And she gave birth to a very beautiful baby, but he died a week after his birth. The husband realized that he was the fault of his wife, so he divorced his neighbor who fell into her company and returned to his wife to beg her for his forgiveness. But she offered him, and she chose to stay single throughout her life without referring to him. But she married a doctor she worked for, so he admired her personality, her love, and the kindness of her heart. And although she refused to marry him at first because of the vast differences between them, he was able to get her to agree to him and forget everything in between.